When the going gets tough, fight or flight are not your only options. Conflict resolution is not an innate skill for most people. It takes dedication and the right mindset to reach a common goal with someone you might disagree with or outright despise. Local conflict management professional Myra Isenhart has worked with corporations, divorced parents, and teenagers to develop the skills they need to live better, happier lives, and it begins with 5 simple steps. To celebrate Conflict Resolution Month, we spoke with Isenhart about those 5 steps, from active listening and brainstorming to developing a plan of action, and how anyone can turn conflict into creative solutions. Phil Lindeman, Krystal 93 News Director, on the phone today with Myra Isenhart, a local conflict resolution professional. And I wanted to start just with your background, Myra. How did you get into conflict resolution and involved with Conflict Resolution Month?
I have a background in conflict resolution, as you know. I'm retired now, and I have some colleagues who've been doing this terrific work statewide called Conflict Resolution Month in Colorado. And they have all kinds of resources, among them those dialogue panels, wonderful big stories with a few words and beautiful pictures describing how conflicts have been resolved successfully in Colorado, all kinds of different conflicts at home, with neighbors, in the community. And we've been able to exhibit those in the month of October, various places in Summit County. So that was the beginning, really, was taking advantage of those resources. And then Karin Stiegelmeyer is a hiking buddy of mine. So I was talking to Karin about the availability of these resources and the fact that the state had made a proclamation that October was Conflict Resolution Month. And so Karin picked right up on that, and she said, well, there's no reason that our county commissioners can't make a proclamation like that. So that was it's usually the first thing that happens a few days before October, just as it did this year, a proclamation that alerts everybody to the fact that there are more successful ways than either fight or flight.
Okay, great. And that's what the next thing that I wanted to get into then was some tips or suggestions that you have for folks, things that they either know and don't practice or things that they just aren't aware of. What are some good conflict resolution solutions?
Well, I think there are 5 steps, at least 5 really solid steps toward conflict resolution that any of us can use at home, at the workplace, in the community. And so if you'd like, I can name those and develop each one a little bit.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. I see the first one as listening, the second as self-examination, the third that we agree on what problems we're talking about with the other, the fourth, that we brainstorm solutions to those problems, and 5, that we make a plan together and then practice that plan. Those 5 steps are preceded, in my mind, and most people's experience, by motivation. Nobody's going to be able to do a good job on constructive conflict resolution unless they feel the need. And then finally, after we can talk about those steps, I can name some resources that are available in this community.
Yeah, that would be great. Because that was the stuff that I wanted to do was, in case folks can't make it to the workshops, that I could give some quick tips or teasers, and then hopefully that'll get them out to some of the presentations.
You bet.
Great. So yeah, we'll start with number 1, with listening.
Okay. And I think it's important to really start with the motivation.
Okay.
Why is it that we would put, because these are not easy. These are not the, what do we say? This is not the way human gravity goes. this takes some effort. So the thing to think about is, how are people motivated? Some are simply sent to conflict resolution by some authority. Most states now require that anybody who files for divorce has to at least attempt mediation, at least go to one session. My work in organizational development was because many managers sent their teams to trainings. We called it teamwork, but at the bottom was the need to develop skills in managing conflict.
Okay.
Then, of course, there's our children. They also get sent in the sense that we say, "Oh my gosh, you're driving me crazy. Just go somewhere, work it out." And the question, of course, is, what does that mean? How are we teaching them? How are we modeling conflict management? But there are ways that we're forced to use these steps. The best possible scenario, of course, is that we use our own authority. We have this sense of dissatisfaction. We know we can do it better. Think about New Year's resolutions. There are times that we look at the situation we're in at home or at work, and we say, I'm not really satisfied, but this could be better. Sometimes couples who are warring go to a counselor. Parents may seek help from teachers or counselors with the difficult, and I don't know if you can hear me over the air, difficult in quotation marks, but difficult for that parent and difficult child. And then finally, a team may look at itself, wonder why other teams are outperforming it, and think about, okay, let's look at our behaviors. What could we improve? So those are the ways of getting started. And unless something like that happens, the chances for conflict resolution or being successful are not really great.
Okay.
It's not always going to happen. We can give it our best shot, and it's not necessarily going to happen unless each person has some desire, some motivation to put effort into it.
All right. So it starts, like you said, with motivation. You've got to be in the right mindset before you even get going.
Absolutely right.
Okay, great.
Okay. So let's talk about listening. Phil, I think you're a professional listener.
I try.
Would you agree?
I try, definitely.
Okay. And what kind of training have you had?
Practice. Lots and lots of practice, usually. That's about the big one. Practice and the fact that the day-to-day job requires it.
Okay. And what we know is that we all practice listening, but some of us practice it in ways that are not productive. An awful lot of us listen waiting for our turn to speak. If we really are honest about our listening, in a conflict, we might sense that we are listening in what I would call a debate style. We're listening for what we disagree with and how to refute that.
Okay.
So sometimes, we could say practice makes permanent. It doesn't necessarily make perfect. So you obviously have a gift. You've learned on the job. Not all of us do. If we think about it, most of us have had lots of training in speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Our parents correct our grammar. Our teachers tell us about subject, object. But when do we have the course or the teaching or the modeling of listening? For most of us, it's a very underused capacity, the true listening to the other.
Okay.
Okay, so what do we do if we want to improve our listening? Listening with the idea that before one gets to speak, before we can respond, we have to paraphrase. Okay? If I understood you correctly, this is your bottom line. This is what you really want out of this situation, this negotiation. Checking it out. Sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. And another little clue, I think another technique for listening is listening for the emotional content. And we call it listening for the music, not the words. I thought it was interesting after that very contentious hearing last week on the news, Nina Totenberg, the legal expert, and she said, before I make any comments, I listen, I watch, and then I listen again with no sound. So she's listening to the music.
Okay.
She's getting the emotional content.
Interesting.
Yeah, fascinating. So anything else about listening?
No, I think that's a good intro to it. And then next one was self-examination?
Self-examination, right. We need to be willing to look at our own behavior and, first of all, recognize that we are wired for two extremes. One is fighting, one is running away. Okay, so that's how some people have dealt for years with their conflicts. Either passively retreat or go on the attack. And I'm sure we've all had the feelings that that's the way to go. So it's a little bit harder to ask ourselves the question, what am I contributing to this conflict? What part of this should I own? And then another way to ask the question is, what are we getting out of prolonging this conflict? We know if you talk to divorce attorneys, a very common situation is the one person who didn't know was coming tends to hang on, even though the divorce is final. The emotional relationship is still there. The resentment is still there. It's that desire for even intimacy. After we are happy to be on our own, happy to manage our own money, we still hang on to the fight around that relationship. It can go on for years. And the question is, what are they getting out of it? The same thing with organizational fights. The conflicts that I saw, they're ongoing, the long-term, hard-to-resolve conflicts. Somebody's getting benefit out of that. It may be very perverse. It may be nothing more than I get attention that way. It's real obvious with little kids, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, where the one who acts out is the one that mom spends the most time with. She has to. She has to. We do the same thing as adults. So it's good to ask ourselves the question, what am I contributing?
Okay. And then from there we were talking identify the problem or agree on problems and concerns.
Right, absolutely right. I used to have a sign that hung over my desk. I wish that I knew what had happened to it. It disappeared in the last move. But it said, if you can state the problem, it can be solved. Okay, if you can state the problem, it can be solved. And oftentimes when we're in conflict with another person, there's more than one problem. It's the way each of us will see it, the situation in different light. Each of us will have different understandings. So we may have more than one problem. That's fine. We can prioritize them. But voicing them, putting them into words is the first step. If we haven't done that clearly and both agreed on what the problem is, we're just going to go around in circles. One of the little tricks that of language that can be used to get an agreement on the problem. How can we present our own problem? Is a little sentence, and the way it goes is, when you blank blank, I feel blank blank because. Okay?
Okay.
When you slam the door in my face, I feel diminished, I feel left out, excluded, isolated. Okay.
Okay, yeah. And I know sometimes people will get down on that because they're like, wow, I don't need to fill out a form to talk about my feelings, or I don't need to, this sort of guidance. But still, it's part of the process to do that thing.
Do you know, if that piece of language doesn't work for you, then work out your own. There isn't anything magic.
Mm-hmm.
It just happens to work for a lot of people because it forces us to get away from criticizing the other person. It isn't about Joe is psychotic. It's in the workplace we tend to put these psychological names on people when it's actually the fact that Joe plays his radio too loud and it's hard for me to concentrate. So when you turn up the volume, I can't get my work done. It's a behavior instead of a personality trait. We're all set personality-wise. After age 3, we're congealed in terms of personality. So the only way out is through. The only way out of a conflict is to name the behavior and then say, how does it make us feel?
Okay, great. And like you said, it's one of those things where if you are motivated to make this work, you'll also be motivated to find the right solutions for it. So you can't let yourself get sidetracked by, well, that's not the way that I solve things. You got to be open to those other ways of solving issues.
You're absolutely right. That's the listening part, isn't it? That's opening your heart and listening in a style that's open as opposed to debate.
Okay, great. And then next one was brainstorming.
Right. Again, this is something we talk about, but if you sit down in a group and you follow the real brainstorming rules, it means no judgment. It means not even any positive judgment. We don't interrupt people by saying, that's a great idea. We just let it roll. And that's the way that real creative thinking can happen, is if we withhold judgment. We'll each have our own suggestions about how we might proceed, but the idea is to get just fill our piece of paper, fill the whiteboard with lots of possibilities. Later on, we can go back and make the judgments and decide, well, that's never going to work, or this other one might require some additional resources. We can make judgments later, but to get it out there brainstormed is important. If we don't have ideas, we can look further. We can look outside our own team, outside our own marriage. In the workplace, there are best practices that are always available in different industries. There are models of behavior that we can look to. What do we think is a great marriage? Who has a great marriage, and how do they talk to each other? 3 times I have taken dogs through obedience school, and I so wish I'd done that before I raised my children. Seriously.
Really?
Yeah, because what they say is give very simple requests. Going back to that agree on the when do I feel, because that's it. One short sentence. We tend to overkill when we're trying to explain to the other person how we feel and what's bothering us. So something really simple request. The other part of obedience training that I learned from was don't keep repeating the same thing. If you're not getting the result that you hope for, then think of something different.
Be creative, like you were talking about earlier. Be creative.
Be creative, exactly. I guess the third way, if we don't have enough solutions of our own, is to be open to professional advice. And that might be counseling. That might be the granny next door with 6 kids and many grandchildren, who not necessarily that the next door neighbor is going to have the answer, but it'll give us something concrete to react to.
Okay. Perfect. And that final piece, that final step was creating the plan. So after you've gone through these other steps, then it's time to have a plan for change.
Absolutely. And to practice it. It's plan and practice. I've sort of put those two together. You could separate them as steps if you wanted to. And that would be to try to measure as closely as possible the success of what we're having. Oftentimes, when we try to get others to listen to it, we will exaggerate. You always criticize my mother. Well, maybe he did criticize my mother occasionally. But what does it mean when we use those global kinds of terms like always and never? We can't tell if we're really going to get any success or not. So try to be as precise as possible.
Okay.
About how are we doing. Then, it's so important to remember that we are imperfect beings. No matter how we may be trying, no matter how much we may value a relationship at home or at work, we make mistakes. We are into the forgiveness business for a lifetime.
I like that. In the forgiveness business. It rolls off the tongue, but it gets to the point too.
Yes. So we send our heart and not our attack dogs, because we know we're not perfect, and why would we expect that our teammate or our partner or a child would be perfect too? And then I think it's important to celebrate the wins, not just to criticize what's wrong. So if you felt your husband had attacked your mother too many times, so we've gone a week and he had no bad things to say about her. Celebrate the wins. Give yourself a pat on the back. This is work. This is not the easy ways. Running away or fighting, those are the easy ways. Then I think the last thing I would say about practicing is I've been impressed by those workplaces and those partnerships that engage in regular maintenance. The marriage that has a date night on Wednesdays. The church staff that has someone come in quarterly to ask the question, how are we doing? And to a third party to engage people in that open conversation that may not happen all by itself. And then you probably, I don't know if Krystal does it, but a lot of organizations will have retreats from time to time. I didn't want to do workshops with teams who weren't willing to go off-site. You stay in the same workplace, you're distracted, you're not open to new ways of doing things. So I think regular maintenance of an important relationship is critically important.
Definitely. And you were asking about Krystal. Yeah, that's one of those things that I think we do. And up here in the mountains, it seems pretty easy because it tends to be that we all share things that we like, getting in the outdoors, doing all that. And so it's kind of easy to have those kind of retreats. Let's go have a ski morning, or let's go, do something in the outdoors, go for a hike or whatever.
That's so great. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
I guess actually the last question that I really did have was you mentioned earlier politics, how we are seeing a little bit of this bickering back and forth, even politicians not being able to use these basic skills. What do you think we could all learn from watching bad examples?
I think that's a great idea. And it's the sort of thing that I used to recommend. I firmly believe that there's probably more to be learned from a bad example than a good one. And sadly, our politics has, what's the motivation there for doing the right thing? It seems to be sadly lacking. I'm sorry to say that, but, that's what it looks like. So conflict resolution is going to need to come from the bottom up. I believe that. I think our state legislature has, if you go down there, if you care about a bill, and you follow a bill, and you watch these people at work, first of all, they work so hard. They don't have big staffs. They don't have big salaries. But they are, for the most part, collegial. Sure, there are some people who've made difficulties and have erred in ways we can't approve. But I'm encouraged. I've gotten very involved with a couple of issues that are involved in the state legislature, and I'm very encouraged. I think we do better at the grassroots level. And here in Summit County, we have 3 terrific commissioners. They're just so well informed, and so they model good listening. They really do.
Mm-hmm. And in my own personal journalism reporting, I feel like I've seen the same thing, and it ends up being reflected sometimes in the news we get. You can almost tell that the journalists who are covering the national level stuff, they're almost not sure how to talk about what's going on, because what can you talk about other than the conflict and the fighting and the pushing back on against each other? Whereas, when you see it, what's happening at the state level, sometimes you almost read about what's actually being done as opposed to what people are fighting about.
Absolutely. Well, and there's always, the element of what is it that sells newspapers and
gets listeners. Yeah, exactly.
Fighting, isn't it? And so I think sometimes we may get more discouraged than we really need to. And we have to dig to find the better examples, the people who are acting out of their better angels, if you will. But it's worth digging for. Otherwise, we just get so discouraged and depressed about the whole thing. Anyway, that's what local government does for me.
Absolutely.
It restores my faith.
In the system. Yeah, me too. I believe that as well. Well, Myra, I think that was about the last thing I had for you. Anything else that you can think of? Maybe a preview of what's coming up for the month for the workshops?
Absolutely. And I think relative to our last conversation, the most relevant is the one that's coming up at the Breckenridge Rec Center on October 17th. And that is, the title of that is Civil Discourse. And it will be 3 community members who will be on a panel discussing civil discourse. There'll be a TED Talk, and then healthy snacks. It starts at 6:30. It's not going to last late into the evening, so it's very much a family affair is the way it's set up. We've had, we had several of these events already, but I would love to send you, I sent you the calendar, didn't I? And the other seminar that I think would be of very general interest is October 29th, 4:30 to 6:30, and that has to do with managing stress.
Okay.
The title is Resilience for Mediators, but it's for anybody who deals with a stressful clientele, a real estate agent, a teacher in a difficult classroom. And it's going to be using some very recent findings in neuroscience to talk about ways of managing stress. I think that will appeal to a lot of people.
Definitely.
Throughout the month of December, there are 3 events I'd like to highlight. One, earlier I mentioned the dialogue panels, and there we have the stories that have been, where conflict has been successfully resolved. That's exactly what's going on. Some of them are at the Justice Center and others at the Breckenridge Rec Center.
Okay.
There's a wonderful table of resources at the North Branch Library. All 3 libraries have been active in this conflict resolution coalition. And this year, the North Branch is one that's, there are books that are aimed at even preschool children, all the way up to, other kinds of more sophisticated treatment of conflict resolution. And then finally, there's a teen center at the County Commons you may know about.
Yeah.
And there's a display of resources for them that are specific conflict resolution tools for teens.
Great. Well, Myra, thanks again for making time to get on the phone and chat a little bit about conflict resolution and some very useful, I would think, easy to follow steps. Easy to follow, not always easy to implement, but easy to follow at least.
Good, Phil. Well, thanks so much for listening. And I didn't mention any of the online resources, but this Conflict Resolution Month.org has also a number of resources and reinforcement and expansion of the points that I have made this morning.
Great. Well, Myra, thanks again for that. And I'll be sure to be pointing people in that direction as well as over to the North Blanchard Library and all across the county for these workshops.
That's so great. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you again. Myra Isenhart on Krystal 93.